Hello, Internet. It's Daniel with Driving and Dragons, and we're back today with another reaction. Who are we reacting to today? Good old generic Ginny D. She has come out with probably one of her last Halloween videos, which is using liches as big bads in Dungeons and Dragons. And as a quick little side note here, I really, really hate the term big bad or big bad evil guy, BBEG. I really dislike that term because it's so juvenile. A villain is a villain. You can say a main villain, a primary antagonist, whatever you want to say there. But the big bad evil guy. You want to talk about something that just steals the nuance out of the game and out of everything that's involved. The big bad evil guy to me is just like, okay, so the person we're against is always the big bad evil person. There's always a big bad evil guy. It's not just a part of an organization, or it lends itself to that nonsense where there's always one key piece that keeps the entire enemy, everything together type mentality, which I'm not fond of. It's just, like I said, it's just juvenile. It's probably just me. I seriously doubt anybody else really cares too much about it, but big bad evil guy has always been something that kind of just sits wrong with me. Anyway, so we're going to step over to Ginny D and see what she has to say about make your big bad a lich.
So, you're the big bad.
The biggest, a mastermind undead spellcaster who feeds on souls and cannot be truly killed.
Thematically, I get it. That sounds terrifying. But don't you only have like 135 hit points? Doesn't seem like much of a challenge, especially at high levels.
Ah, mortal naivete is so charming. As a big bad, combat is not where I truly shine. Our role is to be a driving narrative force throughout the campaign. That could mean murder.
Wow, sounds like liches are really easy to mess up. If only somebody would make a video about how to unlock the potential of liches as big bads.
Sure. Hey, by the way, how did you get into my...
They are really easy to screw up, and it sounds like she's already right on top of how to screw them up. I hate... This is where the big bad evil guy mentality kind of gets in the way. It's like, oh, the lich, liches are bad in combat. No, the hell they're not. They have low hit points as a balance against all the crazy stuff they can do. Now, 5th edition, as always, has screwed just about everything up. When your players are that super powered, it's just, it doesn't really matter. It just comes down to who rolls initiative first. Nothing the lich does. They're going to get 14 saves, and the lich is going to get 1. So it's just a matter of mathematics at that point. But I really dislike it when it's just a modern thing. Oh, they have low hit points or lower hit points and not a great AC. So this combat's going to be whatever, because this combat's going to be super quick. No, the problem here is, and it's like was said before, your monsters are not stupid. Monsters are not stupid. A lich, kind of like a mind flayer, a lich is a hyper intelligent being with centuries of knowledge. You're not going to fight them on a fair playing field, even battles spread out across the battle map and charge and move over. That entire area is going to be rigged against the players.
Liches are a staple D&D villain. Even people outside of the tabletop community know Vecna thanks to Stranger Things, or Zastam thanks to the recent D&D movie. But despite their reputation as powerful spellcasters, liches aren't particularly threatening in combat, at least not on their own. But hear me out, I think that's actually better for a big bad, who's meant to be the ultimate antagonist for an entire campaign arc. That means you need to make sure that your lich's story, character, and roleplay are rock solid, because that's what you're building the conflict of your campaign on. So let's work together to develop your lich big bad in 3 simple steps. Step 1 is nailing down the core elements that every lich needs. These are the things that make a lich a lich. First and foremost, they are undead. You can represent this in a ton of different ways. Maybe they smell like decomposing flesh and are always surrounded by a cloud of buzzing flies. Or maybe they wear a mask or helmet to hide their undead nature, or use illusion magic to hide in plain sight and masquerade as a regular mortal. Maybe they're so ancient that much of their flesh has rotted away, leaving them withered and skeletal. Ask yourself how the fact that they're undead is going to show up in your roleplay and description. For example, if their soft tissue is so deteriorated that they no longer have lips or a tongue, they might communicate exclusively through telepathy or with a detached magical voice. Maybe the body is literally puppeted by strings of glowing necrotic energy, with the lich's mind acting as a puppet master. Maybe the pieces of their body can detach and operate independently, so they can send their hand off on errands like Thing in the Addams Family. Remember, the sky is the limit here. You don't have to just regurgitate undead cliches. Liches aren't your average zombie. They're incredibly powerful, brilliant casters who designed and constructed their undeath with intention. Think about all the different ways that could look. The weirder you get with it, the more memorable and impactful your villain will be. The next core feature is, of course, the vessel to which they bind their soul. This makes it so that even if their body is struck down, the soul is returned to the vessel and the lich lives on. Now, the classic approach to this is to just have it be a fancy container, like a jar or a box. But in my opinion, this is one of the places you can really get clever and subvert your players' expectations. A lich's soul jar is their most protected, most important possession. They
All right. I don't know if soul jar is a 5th edition term or if she just doesn't know how to say phylactery, but there's a problem with that in a lot of ways. And this is just going to be nitpicking a little bit of thing here. The container, the box or the jar or whatever, is not the actual item that the lich is bound to. It's just what holds it. A phylactery is literally like a prayer sheet or a scroll of paper. That's what it is. It's like a, you can have a gem or something of that nature or some small trinket, or it can be like a little slip of paper or something of that nature. But it is the long and short of it is that the jar or whatever is literally just the container that is holding the lich's phylactery. I don't know. Like I said, I don't know if soul jar or whatever is a 5th edition term, but going back, a lot of she says, undead cliches, and then turns around and basically goes down a list of undead cliches. But let's start something real right here. That's real clear. Cliche is not bad. Okay. Cliche is one of those things that it's all in how you use it. And it's like stereotypes. They exist for a reason. Stereotypes exist for a reason. It's a shorthand for us to make decisions and commentary without, in the absence of more perfect knowledge. So in other words, you don't want to, you make a judgment based on a stereotype because you don't have more individual information about a person, and you're in a situation where you have to make a decision right now. And that doesn't necessarily have to be a harmful stereotype, or it can be something that works in the other person's favor. It may be totally neutral, but they exist for a reason. Same thing. Cliche exists for a reason. It is a shorthand that immediately draws the kind of image that you want to your player's mind. And that's very important in Dungeons and Dragons or any other tabletop role-playing game, because one of the big things you want to avoid is really lengthy descriptions. You don't want to go into, and I'm bad about this. I'm bad with the purple prose. I'm bad with the 2-paragraph long description. I always have to go back and edit and chop it down. You have to be less is more, because nobody wants to sit around and listen to you read an essay to them. You can lose your players real fast because they're there to play a game and to participate. This is also something that helps prevent the interrupting player, where you're halfway through your description, they're like, I cast Fireball. Well, I'm casting Fireball before he moves, et cetera, whatever the case may be. Cliche allows for a certain amount of shortcut used properly. So And then, like I said, she turns around and uses several cliches, about the rotting skin and flies buzzing around them and that sort of thing.
Will do whatever they can to prevent people from finding, identifying, and destroying it. Ask yourself, what would you do if your life depended on hiding and defending just one material item of your choice? For a highly intelligent being like a lich, the answer probably isn't tie my soul to a fancy jar and hide it in the back room of a dungeon. We can do so much better than that. What if the lich binds their soul to a commonplace item, making it especially difficult to track down, such as a book stored in a massive library? Bonus, that concept opens up an incredible opportunity for a long-term word puzzle to help players figure out the title of the book they're looking for. Or maybe instead of shouldering the burden of protecting their own soul jar, a smart lich might outsource its guardianship by binding their soul to an item that is already strongly protected, like the crown passed down from monarch to monarch. That way, even if the party figures out the item's true purpose, there are some very real obstacles to reaching it. In the past,
All right, that's kind of wrong. Like I said, traditionally the phylactery is actually something that is written or scribed, but especially a powerful, evil, and ancient creature is not going to bind their soul to something, something that's protected and stuff, like the crown that's passed down through generations. You're talking about a creature that is going to live for centuries, and most kingdoms do not last for centuries. They last for a century, maybe a couple of centuries. The longest running ones may last several centuries. But even long-standing kingdoms go through multiple crowns, multiple royal houses, all kinds of other stuff. That would be stupid. The reason their phylactery is locked and buried deep in some dungeon, sealed away behind 15,000 doors and stuff, is because that's a place they know it can be for hundreds of thousands of years and not be disturbed. Why is it not a commonplace item? Because the problem with a commonplace item is it may get destroyed out of being commonplace. I'm going to make my phylactery a book. Okay, well, congratulations, you've made it to Nuremberg in the 30s, and your phylactery is getting burned on a pile by a bunch of Nazis. Oh, I made it a spoon, man. That's so cool. Okay, well, somebody decided it's time to toss to change the silver, and they've decided to go melt down the spoons. Boom, your phylactery is gone. This is boy, wouldn't that be cool? Wouldn't that be something that subverts the player's expectations? But it makes zero sense. So it doesn't jive, and it's just, this is the kind of little thing that can really yank the players out of their ability to suspend disbelief and be part of a living world. Is, I'm making a decision that makes no sense whatsoever just so I can subvert the player's expectations. In writing, this is a big no-no. Subverting expectations purely to be subversive is bad.
official D&D content has claimed that the item used for a Lich's soul jar needs to be made from a solid material and cost at least a few thousand gold pieces. But I think you should feel very comfortable ignoring those kinds of stipulations if they limit your creativity. By all means, if you want your Lich to bind their soul to an ancient tree or their own reflection or a living dragon, you're the one who makes the rules. Lich.
Okay. She's got a good point here, but she then provides terrible examples. Yeah. The rules are guidelines, and have what they bind their soul to, as long as it narratively fits and makes sense, is really the way you should go. It's way better to have a Lich who has their soul bound to a little puppet doll that is just something that was from their childhood, like their last little link to reality or whatever, than one that just went and said, well, I have to have something that's worth such and such gold pieces, so I'm going to go pick up a diamond that I'm going to crush over my little sheet of paper that has a prayer written on it. So there's a definite piece of advice here that's good. However, she then goes to say, an ancient tree or a living dragon. Yes, I have sacrificed everything, including my soul, and spent all this time and power to become immortal, so I can tie the thing that keeps me alive to something that will die.
Lichdom can look however you want it to look in your world. The final element that all liches share is that they're spellcasters. Becoming a lich is a magic ritual, so in order to become one, you gotta have access to magic. They're mostly wizards, although in some past editions, they've pulled from other casting classes. Now, to me, this is one of those know the rules before you break them things. If your lich is a wizard, then great. Think through their history as a wizard. How and why did they learn magic? What school of magic did they specialize in? What wizardly ambition or fixation caused them to pursue lichdom? But if you want to step outside of the box in terms of your lich's background, I think you should go for it. Just make sure that's something that you're thinking about and factoring into your character. A lich who was a cleric is going to look very different from a lich who was a warlock. You can even base a lich on a non-caster class. In fact, there's a YouTuber who does a whole series about reimagining liches as different classes. He even has free downloads with stat blocks and stuff for each one. What was his name again? It was like Spiky Hat or something.
And I made a Bard Lich. They stay alive as long as someone remembers their song. And then I made a Sorcerer Lich, and they stay alive as long as it has direct descendants with their blood. What else? Oh yeah, then I made a Druid Lich. It stays alive as long as their soul is connected.
Well, great having you, Pointy Hat, but I'm sure you have tons to do.
Oh, no. Don't worry. I got all day. I also have an Artificer Lich, and that one stays alive.
I'm sure I'll think of it eventually.
I generally like Pointy Hat just because he's kind of amusing. But to be honest, a lich should not be anything except a spellcaster. And I get the idea, kind of a cool thing. And I'm not saying that it could never work, but it really kind of detracts from what a lich really is to not be a spellcaster. And to be perfectly honest, a lich should be a particular kind of spellcaster. It doesn't necessarily need to be arcane, but it needs to be a pure spellcaster. I would say a wizard, a sorcerer, a cleric. It needs to be a character that is predominantly focused around magical power. A fighter lich makes no sense because they're literally trading all of the stuff they worked their entire mortal life to obtain, that strength, that stamina, that force of physical prowess, and they're trading that away for no hit points and a bunch of other stuff, because basically to become frail for the rest of eternity. That doesn't make any sense. It wouldn't jive with their mentality of, I'm trying to live forever and extend my power and whatnot, but I'm literally going to lose the thing that I'm good at. I would have to then become some kind of spellcaster. The entire purpose, like the classic drive of a lich, is generally knowledge. Like, we'll take Vecna, for example, who is the most famous of the liches. What is he a god of? He's a god of secrets and lies. He is a god of forbidden knowledge, because a lich is in pursuit of that powerful arcane knowledge that takes centuries and decades and centuries to obtain. And they're willing to trade their soul for the ability to gain more knowledge and more power. Their body can rot away. It doesn't matter. Like, literally, their soul and their life force is bound to an object. And it's bound to an object to give them the ability to have those centuries to obtain that knowledge and that power. The centuries of knowledge and power doesn't really apply to a more martial class. Now, I could see possibly like some kind of artificer wanting to do that because he wants to continue the scientific knowledge and development of whatever gizmos, gadgets, or technology that he's building onto. But to be perfectly honest, I think it actually hurts the lich as a creature or as an entity and as a storytelling tool to make it something that is not just a powerful spellcaster, but a dedicated spellcaster.
Anyway, to me, those are the three basics of a lich character. If you're creating a lich for
Not to Jenny D, those are the three basics of a lich character. Like, it's like, these to me are the three basics of a lich character. No, those are literally the elements that make a lich.
your campaign, make sure they're undead, make sure you know what vessel they've bound their soul to and how they're going to guard it, and make sure that they're a caster. Or if you're going to change any of those things up, which you should totally feel free to do, just make sure that you're doing that with intention. Okay, so you've got an idea of what your Lich is going to be like, but creating a scary villain isn't enough, and that's because a villain and a big bad are not the same thing. We'll talk about that in a second, but first, the Lich wants to talk to you, and I'm going to be honest, I am very scared of telling her no.
We're definitely going to skip what the Lich is going to tell us. I'm just going to say this real quick. She's right about making sure you do things with intention. And she's about to go into a villain is not a big bad and a villain are not the same thing. We're going to do that. And we're probably going to get all up in the reasons why I can't. I'm just done with the concept of BBEG versus, hey, you just have protagonists, villains, people that live in your world that happen to be your opponent at this point in time. And it's one of those situations where we're looking at some pretty generic advice here so far. And what hasn't been generic has not been particularly good. So I'm hoping she comes up with something that is, makes this really worth going through. But we'll find out here in a second after I get through skipping her advertisement for whatever thing she's shilling, whatever 5e related stuff she's got.
Friends.
So what separates a villain from a big bad? Most D&D parties defeat villains pretty regularly. After all, the act of playing D&D is inherently episodic, and in a system like D&D, where combat is a pretty big part of the gameplay, that necessitates a sort of monster of the week setup, where your party encounters creatures that need killing on a fairly consistent basis.
This is not correct at all. Good game masters and good, even in D&D, which is a combat-centric game, good DMs can have entire sessions where dice aren't rolled, entire sessions where there's no combat, sometimes multiple sessions back to back where there's very little combat at all, or even really very little action at all. It all depends on how you have your game set up. You definitely don't need this monster of the week mentality. That is very much a rookie amateur DM 5e thing. Unless you're playing more of a dungeon crawl hack and slash game. And even then, dungeon crawl hack and slash game is typically not monster of the week type deal. It's just more combat heavy and more combat focused. But no, it absolutely 100% does not necessitate this. And that is just Jenny's inexperience showing.
What makes a big bad special is that they recur, and in order to recur, they have to be too powerful, or too slippery, or too sneaky for the party to easily kill. They should be the looming specter over everything the characters do. Your job is to create a villain so threatening and so omnipresent that your players can't forget about them for long. There are a ton of different ways you can pull this off, but I'll give you a few examples. For instance, maybe you embed them in the setting. Make your Lich unavoidable, so your adventurers keep finding their bony little fingers stuck into everything as they navigate your world. Maybe your Lich is legendary and universally feared. The people of this area know that she exists, and so far they've survived by trying to stay out of her way. Yes, innocents have to die to feed her soul jar, but wouldn't the death toll only rise if they...
That must be a 5e thing, this whole innocents have to die to feed her soul jar deal. I don't recall that in any previous editions where Liches have to go out and kill people and take souls to stay alive. It's literally just they have a phylactery, and if you destroy it, you destroy them, and if you can't destroy it, you can't destroy them. So I don't know where the feeding souls thing kind of comes into in this case. And if she's using the term big, bad, evil guy as the driving plot, which doesn't even necessarily need to be a creature or an entity or a sentient being. There's a lot of things that can drive a story and drive a narrative. But if that's what she's using the term big, bad, evil guy to be for, it doesn't necessarily have to be omnipresent, omnipowerful, omnipotent. Like, let's take sword and sorcery, for example. In sword and sorcery, a lot of times it's not omnipresent, omnipowerful, omnipotent. It just happens to be a powerful entity that for some reason crosses paths with and comes into play with the characters. But more than anything, yeah, you want it to be somewhat recurring. You don't necessarily need it to be recurring. You could hint. Oh, we're starting to figure it out. We're starting to figure it out without ever actually showing them. But if you are going to have them omnipresent and there and have all kinds of signs and showings of them, you don't necessarily have to make them slippery and sly and all this other jazz. Your players shouldn't be just randomly attacking shit. If they haven't been given a reason to attack the Lich, they shouldn't be doing it unless you're maybe running an evil campaign, which is another great way to use a Lich. Run an evil campaign, have the Lich be somebody that the players are working for until the end when the obvious betrayal comes, and now they're against the Lich that they've been working for the entire time. But no, you don't necessarily have to make them too powerful or too potent or omnipresent. Like, there's a lot more ways to do it.
They try to fight back, or at least that's how it's been in the past. But now something is changing. More people are dying. The Lich has set her sights on some new goal, and standing by, hoping the next lost soul won't be yours, is no longer an option. Or maybe your Lich hides their nature behind a secret identity, occupying a position of power like a lord or king, a royal advisor, the leader of a collective of mages. They've wormed their way into their system of choice, making themselves trustworthy and essential. Between their years of work building up relationships and respect, and their ability to magically influence those around them, the characters may fight an uphill battle, even getting anyone to believe that they're not who they seem. And once they make an enemy this well connected, things will get a lot more difficult for your players. Another great way to elevate your Lich from villain to big bad is to make it personal for your party. Stopping the Lich isn't just about being good citizens or heroes, it affects them intimately. Maybe your players, for whatever reason, know about or have access to the Lich's soul jar. They might not even have been looking for it. Maybe they stumbled across it during another adventure, or were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Now they're a threat to the Lich, who needs to keep tabs on them and keep them in check. Or maybe your party faces the Lich early on in their game, before they know what they are. The Lich is weakened for some reason, vulnerable, and against all odds, the party defeats them, rescuing their innocent victims, looting their lair for all the arcane treasures they can carry. But little do they know, death isn't the end for this particular enemy. The Lich manifests a new form, rebuilds their strength, and makes a vow of vengeance against the ones who struck them down and stole their hard-won collection. However you do it, a big bad should keep coming up. Your players investigate some new horror and find that it all ties back to the Lich. When your party starts to feel comfortable or safe, the Lich pops up again to put the fear of God in them. The big bad doesn't always have to be front and center, but find ways to make sure that they never fully disappear. At this point, you have a big bad. Hooray! But like I said at the very beginning of this video, a big bad truly lives in the roleplay. So how do you roleplay your Lich? I've made dozens of videos about roleplay and character development, and while you certainly can go super deep with character expression, I think you really only need two things to have a good foundation for roleplay. The first is their persona. Basically, what are they like? How do they act and talk? What does it feel like to interact with them? If you need ideas for this, you can pick any of the decisions that you've already made about this character and just explore that. For example, let's take the Lich who has disguised himself and lives at the royal court. Maybe he'd be extremely practiced at courtly social graces, and he'd probably be a very confident and smooth liar. He's the type of villain to offer your party a fine, aged cognac when he catches them sneaking into his lair, and sigh deeply when someone lobs the first attack because combat is just so uncouth and makes such a mess. Or consider how the fear of death and the limitations of time affect the ways that mortals act, and how we might behave differently if we didn't bear those burdens. Maybe your Lich just has absolutely no sense of urgency, because why would she? She's got all the time in the world. She'll tell a 2-hour story if you let her. She threatens the party that she'll be back to deal with them later, which could mean next week or could mean in 50 years. Or maybe her plan is to conceal herself and simply outlive the party. How long could that take? A few hundred years? That means instead of a game where the Lich hunts the party, they become the hunters.
All right, so she just really undermined a lot of what she previously said. Why is a super powerful, omnipotent being that is so much more powerful than the party and so threatening, why are they going to hide to just outlive the party? Why are they going to delay their goals? because of, to let a few people die. You got an elf in that party. It's going to be 700 years. So she's undermining some of her previous stuff. There's some good stuff in there when it comes to, I do believe that a truly good villain does not live in the role play. A truly good villain lives in the narrative. It's not necessarily how you role play the villain or that main antagonist. It's how you weave that antagonist into your story. It's how you make sure that antagonist has their fingerprints on things, and how you can pick it up and see it, how you lead to them. In a 3.5 game I'm running right now, I've got a layer of Kythons that are an enemy. I mean, they're not, it's not a big overarching part of the campaign, but they're there right now. But in that whole thing, I've got the party out looking for a hobgoblin raider base, very basic, vanilla starter quest, whatnot, for a low level party. I think they're level 3. And, they're out looking for these hobgoblins and goblins and where they're hiding. And one of the things that they come across is this slaughtered party where it's like it was a hobgoblin camp that got attacked, and they're eviscerated and torn apart and tortured. And so I've shown them that there's something vicious and sadistic there. And with good search checks and whatnot, they find a small section of like chitinous plating, like a carapace type armor, just a small part of it. These are little hints. They find tracks with a significant survival check, with a good successful survival check, and find these two-toed clawed tracks pointing at something more vicious in the woods than just the hobgoblins who've been stealing livestock and trade goods and raiding. That's not role play. I'm not role playing the Kythons. I'm just leaving clues, little things, and those clues get more and more significant till you have the reveal. Same thing. Your Lich doesn't have to. Like, you could have the party never talk to the Lich whatsoever, never have a role playing interaction with the Lich at all. But if it's been properly weaved throughout the entire narrative, you're gonna have the effect you need.
I generally feel like the more you think outside the box, the more interesting a character you'll create. And with your big bad, the last thing you want is to create something so cliche that it bores your players.
Okay, there's a good piece there, and there's some bad there. There's a warning on this. Yeah, you want to have, you do want to subvert some expectations, because it provides a little bit of a dopamine hit, a little surprise, a little bit of excitement, and some adrenaline to your players. You want to have something, you want to try and make something a little bit more unique. And there's nothing wrong with doing something that's cliche if it's done well. There's nothing wrong with doing something that's just exactly what's expected, as long as it's done well and it fits. But that's a way you can make things memorable, is to give little quirks, little pieces of personality there. Where the caution comes in, though, is don't go too far outside the box. It's real easy to say, well, man, I'm going to go outside the box. I'm going to subvert expectations. I'm going to make a really unique, cool Lich character, and then totally jump the shark and do something that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And that just, when you have something that just obviously doesn't jive, your player ends up with their resources, their mental resources, dedicated to figuring out why the hell there's this Lich that has this motivation, or why the hell this would even be a thing, as opposed to being involved in your narrative and your story, because you've thrown something that makes so little sense. Their brain is just stuck trying to figure out why it happened in the first place. And you don't want to do that, just because you don't want to do that at all. And it's real easy to do if you get too ham-fisted and too over the top with the whole trying to, be unique.
If you pick just one personality trait that's outside the classic Lich archetype, you'll end up with a way more memorable villain. For example, instead of a cruel or violent or heartless Lich, imagine a melancholic one. After all, they've watched everyone they know and love die. And what's the point of forming new relationships when they'll all eventually meet the same fate? Maybe they truly feel that they're pursuing some higher purpose, to advance the field of arcane study, to solve some riddle that holds the world back from accessing magic's true power. They sacrificed everything for the greater good, even their own life. And it's truly tragic that the souls of innocents have had to be sacrificed for this work too. This Lich has carried the increasing burden of those deaths for hundreds or thousands of years, and they do that painful duty because if they don't, who else will? Whatever persona you settle on, just jot down a few adjectives.
All right, that was actually a really good piece of advice right there. There's some examples I disagree with in there, but I'm not going to harp too much on the examples here. That's actually a really, really good piece of advice where those, especially the motivations, can be fantastic. And tying back to kind of like, she doesn't give the warning of being very careful about jumping the shark on subverting too much, but then she turns around and says, hey, pick one personality trait and make it something a little off the way. That's a good way to start, where you're just taking one facet and putting the focus there or changing it. A melancholy Lich that has a tragic backstory is fantastic. Maybe you do have a Lich that started with good motivations and was or wants to advance arcane study. That's a great one, because that's the primary reason that most Liches become Liches, is to continue furthering their learning and power. However, I'm going to say something here, and the first time I ever heard about this was I believe it was in the Faerun Compendium, that they had the good Lich. The good Lich is the dumbest thing on the planet. All right, there should not ever be a good Lich. Liches are evil. They are subverting the natural order. They are the ultimate expression of selfishness, as they are willing to sacrifice the immortality of their soul to have immortality of the physical being. They are breaking the rules of the universe for their own selfish gain and their own desires. And it doesn't matter if that selfish gain has a good intention or not. This is an inherently evil act that is evil to the point of, even if it were a good character doing it, it should require either the lengthy process that leads them to becoming evil, as their good intentions are constantly subverted by the things they have to do to obtain lichdom, or it needs to be a situation where they try to do this for the good reasons, but the inherent evil of that act just alters their personality in those ways. You should not have, they're trying to do this for the, they're making a trade-off. The ends justify the means. No, not at all. Even if that was their initial motivation, and that's your subversion, is that this Lich was originally good, no, a Lich is an inherently evil creature. Tying back to what I said in a previous part of this response, maybe you have that Lich. The Lich is the good character. He's a good wizard, and he knows that there's a great evil that is brewing, and it's going to be thousands of years before it gets here. Okay? Think of it like Urza from Magic the Gathering, who is looking decades ahead at the Phyrexian invasion. He knows it needs to be there. But he's timeless because he's a planeswalker. But if you follow that story of Magic the Gathering, what happens with Urza? It becomes so driving and so obsessive, and he's looking with such a long view that he just tramples all over everything in the presence, and is a real bastard to anybody who has a lifespan that's less than a millennia. And even most of the people who are other planeswalkers and whatnot see him as an obsessed, driven bastard too. So you have your good wizard, and what's he do? Oh, I have to be here to fight this great enemy. He starts to become a Lich. He's having to go through all the atrocities and keeps telling himself it's for the greater good. It's for the good of everybody. It's for the greater good. And he finally ties his soul to the phylactery, and it's that little wooden doll that goes in the box. Then fast forward 1,000 years later, things are happening, parties against him. His soul is rotten to the core. He has forgotten everything about the little boy who grew up and had the little toy doll. He has forgotten everything, and he is driven by that all-consuming hatred of stopping this from happening, and he's trampled everything in the meantime. Maybe the party gets that phylactery and has the ability to remind him of what he once was. But that evil has so consumed and rotted his soul that it's only a temporary thing. But, maybe it's enough, depending on how you want to play out the game. Maybe this is the kind of thing that causes him to make one great sacrifice to try and make up for all of his evil. It reminds him of his cause. Maybe it's something that just delays him for a moment, but he turns away and, destroys, or takes the doll and makes it disappear or whatever. Or he just became so powerful that he absorbs his power back into himself, and the phylactery doesn't matter anymore, and he destroys the doll in a symbolic gesture, showing that he has progressed to being irredeemably evil and giving the players their impetus to destroy him at all costs. So there's ways to do that, and she's very much right on taking that one element and kind of expanding on it to make something very good happen in terms of narrative and story. However, you don't want to have you don't want to subvert the Lich by making it not a Lich, and by basically it's like, and how are you good when you do this? You're not.
Your Lich is haughty and fastidious, or unhurried and self-effacing, or gloomy and forlorn. That's part 1 of your roleplay foundation. Part 2 is their motivation. I know this is a weird metaphor for a high fantasy context, but if the persona is the car, the motivation is the driver. Should I have done like carriage? The carriage and the driver? A car can look and feel and sound and smell in a million different ways, but that doesn't really affect whether it takes a left or right turn. That's entirely up to the driver. And for a character, that driver is their goal. So what is your Lich's goal? Once you know it, you can reference it whenever you need to ask yourself what your Lich would do. In most cases, this will be tied to why they became a Lich in the first place. Are they trying to ascend to godhood, to rule the world, to alter the past? This is another great place to shake things up and give your Lich some really unique flavor. For example, maybe she's obsessed with breaking down the barriers between animal and man, and conducts horrible experiments where she uses magic and medicine to merge the bodies of several creatures, trying to create the ultimate being, with all the best pieces of every species. Her lair is defended by a construct with the body of a dragon, the eye stalks of a beholder, and the brain of a mind flayer. If she wants to spy on the party, she sends out a creature stitched together from a roper and a mimic. Maybe she's even given her own undead body a few strategic modifications. The more successfully the players challenge her, the more interested she gets. Their minds and bodies are unique and valuable. What could she accomplish if she had access to them? Or maybe your Lich was a ruler who brought peace to a troubled land. As they grew older and still had no heir, they worried that after their death, things would once again descend into violence, war, and chaos. They became a Lich so that they could rule forever, the kingdom's eternal protector. What's a few innocent citizens' souls when weighed against guarding the entire kingdom from ruin? I mean, that's why we have presidential term limits, right? To prevent Liches. So, let's...
That's actually pretty funny. Funny because I guarantee you that she votes for the Liches. I would bet that if she lives in her district, she voted for Diane the Mummy Feinstein, who was, somebody finally found her phylactery, thank God. But, she actually, like I said, this is another point where I'm going to agree with Jenny D. It's still relatively generic advice. It's a little bit better than just, what's right out of the Dungeon Master's Guide, Monster Manual, Player's Handbook type stuff. But a Lich's motivations are everything. And those motivations need to be long reaching. You take your king, for instance, that she brought up. There's a good example of the I'm going to try and be here for 1,000 years type thing. And you watch him descend into tyranny, and then he becomes kind of like a dark lord, very tyrannical. And he becomes the personification of lawful evil. He is evil because that rigid adherence to the law, to the rulership, is what's important. Not, he's gone from protecting the kingdom and bastardized it into the best way to protect the kingdom is to protect it from itself by having no freedom. No freedom, no crime. Everything's a crime except doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing and what you're told. Bingo. Now you got your motivation. Then you got your Lich. That's his drive, and that also becomes how the party can become most frustrating to him, is unwinding his systems of power that have been sent for years. Those are all pretty good ideas and pretty good examples. There's not really a lot that I can say bad or encounter to that last little section.
Let's recap. Your Lich should 1. Include the staples of Lichdom, undeath, a soul vessel, and access to magic. 2. Be not just a villain, but a big bad who will provide a recurring threat throughout your campaign. And 3. Have a unique and memorable persona and motivation that you can use to bring them to life in your roleplay. What do you think? Ready to make your next big bad a Lich? I would love to make more videos like this.
Okay. So the thing is that basically everything she said applies to, this is why I call her generic Ginny D. She just does her breakdown. It's literally something that applies to every villain. You need to make sure that they have the core elements of what they actually are, followed by a motivation, followed by a way to be omnipresent, even if that's just woven into the story and that sort of thing. That is the most basic generic advice on the planet. And it's literally, if you have the impetus to become a GM, it's going to be the kind of thing that even somebody with no creativity is going to just come up with on their own, because that's what you think. We think in how, what, when, where, why. We think in how, what, when, where, why. Those classic questions. What are our players going to be doing? How can they accomplish it? Why are they doing it? Who's causing it to happen? These are the basics that just exist there. Now, like I said, there's definitely some good here. She is not off base the way she is in a lot of ways. This is not in any way one of her worst videos, but there's also some I'm going to say some uncareful advice in there. And there are some places where I think she's just flat out wrong. But what do you think? You think generic Jenny got it right this time? Do you think this is better or worse than her normal stuff? Do you think I'm off base? Please leave a comment below, like, share, and subscribe, and tell your friends to come take a look. See you next time.